So this is Ambassador Michael Polk. What an honor to see you, sir. And this is Dan Whitman, and it is March 24th, 2025, a year of many questions and very few answers, I think. Ambassador Polk, when we spoke very briefly by email, uh, I said, I told you something about the purposes of the course, and you suggested a starting point. May I invite you to use that starting point in your comments to us today?
I would be delighted to. And please, I want to make this as useful to your participants as possible, and therefore offer you two versions of this. One is I can just make some very broad general comments right now about what's, if you wish, about America First foreign policy and my reflections on that. Or I also have some of this stuff committed to a set of PowerPoint slides, which I can quickly go through. Would you rather have me just go and talk, or would you like to go ahead and have me pull up those PowerPoint slides and go through them systematically? What would be
Um,
most
Am-
advantageous to your group?
Ambassador, we want everything. We want everything. Can you give us these comments? And then, of course, we're curious to see your PowerPoint on.
Well, then let me go ahead and use that, make my comments on the basis of those PowerPoints, because we can go through them as quickly or as slowly as you would like to. So let me
Okay.
let me pull this up.
I am now making you co-host. I hope
Okay,
that's
thank you. That's fine. Let me see if that comes up.
yes, got it. Yes, we see
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Oh, that.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Can you see
Fair
that?
enough. Arizona State University. Everybody got that? Only I can make mistakes about that. Arizona State, an
Arizona
amazing
State.
organization. Ambassador Polt, I believe, sits in Washington, but
I do.
ASU has many positive tentacles, wonderful outreach and international programs. At some point, Ambassador, you can tell us about ASU. Oh my gosh, Taras Dumuch graduated from ASU last year, one of our participants. How
There you
interesting is
go.
that?
There you
Okay,
go.
okay.
There you go. So let me go ahead, and so here we go.
Yeah,
So Arizona State University, I sit at Arizona State University Washington Center, which is here on 18th and I Street in Washington, D.C. We also have a presence in LA, and we also run an engineering school in Vietnam. So Arizona State University is one university in many different locations. I'd like to sort of start our entire conversation today with um, this basic premise on which we base our entire philosophy when it comes to global leadership. If you look at global conflicts, human suffering, failed societies around the world, all have one thing in common: absent, failed, or malignant leadership. That's the premise of how we constitute our attention to what we call character-driven leadership in our efforts at ASU and in the Leadership Diplomacy and National Security Lab, which is my organization that I co-lead with my colleague, a retired Army three-star general, with whom I share the overall mission of our lab. Uh, Here is a statement by a former U.S. Secretary of State about the nature of American diplomacy in his views. Secretary of State George Shultz, Secretary of State between 82 and 89, said, Americans, being a moral people, want their foreign policy to reflect the values we espouse as a nation, but Americans, being a practical people, also want their foreign policy to be effective. I think that's a wonderful summation of what I think the comfortable, if you wish, the sweet spot of American diplomacy and American foreign policy. Now, here is the current administration's position about the core principles of American foreign policy under the Trump administration, seeking answers to three basic questions. Does it Does our policy make America safer? Does our policy make America stronger? Does it make America more prosperous? Now, let me stop here for just a moment and ask participants to say, are the two slides Secretary Shultz's statement, a former Secretary of State, and this statement, as articulated by the current sitting Secretary of State, Secretary Rubio, are those two statements compatible?
Great question. Great question. And Taras, I want you to come in at any point. Taras has been, I guess, trained in these principles. I mean, to me, they seem to be partly compatible, partly incompatible, but I would love to know what others think. I mean, the obvious thing here is that with the slide on the screen says America, America, America. It is so it is centered on one country. Um, the Schultz statement does not contradict that, but it does not emphasize that. Anybody else have reflections on this? We think we know where you're going with this, Ambassador, but we'd like to show you that we're coming with you.
It just may appear that the second slide makes the price payer all the other countries for those values achieved by America, sort of being safer, stronger, and prosperous at the cost of the others. So that's the concern of mine, at least.
Thank you, Taras.
I think that's a very, very accurate statement, Taras. And of course, the weakness. I'll use the word weakness. The weakness of the entire America First principle, and that is that if you make any one country first, you're automatically designating everybody else as being second or third, because there can only be one first, unless you emphasize partnership and alliances, and that's not what this does. Now, the reason I asked the question the way I did is because it doesn't have to be contradictory to the George Shultz statement about Americans seeking a moral foreign policy and an effective foreign policy, but it is how you, and I would submit to you, how you answer this question is what puts this in relevance to a more broader view of America's foreign policy rather than just taking care of itself. Because you could argue that America is safer in its partnerships and friendships with its allies around the world. America is made stronger by working together with the rest of the world community on common goals. And America is more prosperous when it engages in free and open and fair trade around the world, where all the ships rise, where everybody gets better, comes to be more prosperous, including America. So how you answer this question can ameliorate some of the sharp edges of the ingoing proposition.
Can I add just a side note? We have discussed in previous sessions George Shultz as the gardener who saw, as George Kennan saw diplomacy as a gardener situation where you would plant the seeds, have faith that the seeds would sprout, and then basically let it go. Nicholas Burns, after Schultz's demise, published a piece in Foreign Affairs where he compared Schultz to a gardener. And I think that's another essential part of Schultz that we don't sometimes see. We have, can you see the chat, Ambassador, from Naomi?
I'm looking at the chat right now. It's from Naomi. She says it also seems to espouse a remarkably short-term understanding of national safety, security, and prosperity. No nation's fate is independent of others in a globalized world.
Thank you, Naomi.
Naomi, I certainly agree with you on that. It is the perception that this slide creates that America is an island that can simply tend to its to use Professor Whitman's comparison to tend to its garden by itself. There are no outside influence on its horticulture, and the answer is my answer would be is that's not really possible in a globalized world, and the fact that the globe is shrinking is simply, I contend, a reality that one cannot escape.
I
Does that
guess the
mean that nations, does that mean those nations do not look out for their own interests? Of course they do. But do they have to do it to the exclusion of other nations' interests, where there a certain collaborative effort creates a greater, broader good? I think is also historically accurate when one looks at the record of how nations have succeeded, either alone or in conjunction with others.
And the rhetorical question is, how in the world could we convince the current administration of the importance of what you have just said? There's no answer to that question. It's rhetorical.
Well, here then that's a very good segue. Then thank you very much. A good segue is the next several slides are going to be outlines of particularly subsets of America First foreign policy as articulated by this administration and implemented to some degree by this administration. And the way I'd like to approach this is to go ahead and lay out the overall position and then talk about the reaction that has already come or how the world has reacted to this and is dealing with this new reality. So you can see sort of that it's not happening in isolation because every action has a counteraction that occurs along the way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
So let's start with it's in no particular order. Here is immigration and borders. It is in some order because it's sort of in order of importance within the domestic context of the United States. Immigration and borders was a key issue in our election last year. It has been a key issue in terms of how this administration has approached migration across our borders, and here you have some of the elements of how America has approached this. Overall emphasis being on reducing legal and illegal migration, and then undertaking efforts to go ahead and deport migrants who are not documented in the United States, and also taking certain action vis-a-vis neighboring countries to go ahead and insist that they help in this overall effort for us to be able to control our borders. And in that context, there have been some interesting relationships developed along the way, including one that's comes up in a later slide between, for instance, the United States and Venezuela, where Venezuela is considered to be an illegitimate government officially by the United States, but nevertheless, the Venezuelan regime is cooperating with United States deportation efforts by taking back Venezuelan migrants.
For those who haven't followed this in the last 3 or 4 days, the first contingent were taken, I would say, illegally to Salvador, and great thanks have been given to the president of Salvador, who's been very interactional with President Trump. But in the last couple of days, Venezuela has agreed to take the deportees. I don't know if they're taking them indirectly from Salvador or directly from the US, but this shows us there is contact between the two governments. This is something of a surprise.
It is.
Yeah.
Now, the important part here that I would, with each one of these things, I would like to at least make one point that I think is one needs to remember. It has some positive and legitimate elements to it. The fact that the U.S. border system, particularly at its southern border, is not operating the way it should, is accepted across the political spectrum in our country. So it is not a Republican or a Democrat idea that the border is not broken in the southern border, particularly. It is agreed that it is broken, and that the U.S. needs to find a better way to manage its border. The question is not over whether we should manage our border, but how we should manage our border and how we should manage the entire migration policy of people joining the United States, either temporarily or permanently, and how we do this in the most efficient and humane manner. That's the argument that's going on here, not the fact that we have issues. We do have border issues, and that's a legitimate concern.
Right. Maybe, I mean, it seems out of order with your presentation, but Peterson Warrero, calling in from Nairobi today, quotes Kissinger. I am not an admirer of Kissinger, and I think this quote shows, I mean, the question, his quote, a country that demands moral perfection of itself as a test of its foreign policy will achieve neither perfection nor security. I actually dispute that notion. Henry Kissinger, often referred to as a realist, and who had a certain disdain for any moral content in a foreign policy. But Ambassador, you began this talk, but you used the word morality. I don't know, do you have a reaction to this quote from Kissinger?
I would respectfully also disagree with Dr. Kissinger on this issue, not, except maybe I could go ahead and agree with him because he uses the word perfection. In any human endeavor, perfection is unachievable. Since perfection is unachievable, I guess I could say, yes, he's right, and I agree with him. But we're not talking about perfections. We're talking about creating the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people in a human context. So in a non-godlike situation, we will do the best we can. It is intent and capability to achieve the best possible outcome. What Dr. Martin Luther King used to call the arc of the moral universe being long, but bending toward justice. It is that arc of the moral universe that we're trying to bend toward justice and continue to bend in a more positive, justice-driven direction. That's
And
what
you say the greatest good for the greatest number of people. It's not stated, but if this is a policy, then it benefits the United States.
categorically.
Yeah.
So let me move to another issue that is high on the agenda, and that's economy and trade. With tariffs being spun out in all directions, both allies and adversaries from the United States, with the intent to create, at least as the administration articulates it, a more fair trading system, which this administration sees as being rigged against the United States. That includes, of course, withdrawing also from certain kind of multilateral trading organizations or arrangements. And the question here is, does the historical record support this argument that the global trading system is seen rigged against the United States? I'll give you very briefly my opinion. The global trading system was invented by the United States, championed by the United States, sponsored by the United States, and designed to be a fair system that gives the United States a considerable amount of advantage in the process. The historical record of American economic performance suggests that while there obviously are some inequities, particularly in terms of manufacturing and labor rights, etc., in the United States, overall, the American economy has done exceedingly well in the trading system it invented. So, nevertheless, you now have this effort to go ahead and right the ship, if you wish, by this administration, which in turn has caused, of course, countries to react. A tariff spun out against one economy results in a tariff or economic response by that same economy vis-a-vis the United States. And the question is, where does the cycle end in the end result of this continuous effort to go ahead and impose a certain level of pain, economic pain, if you wish, on one country's economy or another. The past record of this in historical terms is very poor. That tariffs do lead not to economic advantage, but to economic deprivation. The most salient one of which is, of course, the depression of the 1920s and 1930s, where heavy tariffs didn't cause the depression, but certainly contribute to its depth.
That would be President Hoover, yes.
That would be Hoover. That would be Hoover, and then of course the counter movement being the New Deal and the FDR's efforts to go ahead and then right the ship in a different direction thereafter.
And we've seen, and the Trump administration is not the first one that has either ignored or decided that the historical record is not relevant and has gone in this direction. The trickle-down theory, likewise, has been, I think, disproved 3 or 4 times, and yet the current administration seems to believe in it either because we're in an exceptional period and historical record is not relevant, or because they wish to ignore history. Well, anyway.
Again, I would say thank you. I would say, in fairness to them, because I said we want to do that on each occasion to fair. There are some trade inequities or some trade issues which deserve to be addressed vis-a-vis, particularly our trading partners, our most important trading partners, or for that matter, our trading adversaries or competitors, if you wish. And it's totally legitimate to address this. The question again is just like the answer to the three foreign policy questions is how you address it,
Yeah.
not that you address it. And the question here is this the most effective way to address whatever ails or whatever concerns us here in this country? And that the question on that one is still out because so far the market has reacted negatively to some of the uncertainties, some of the back and forth on tariff policy and other economic measures the United States has taken. And when the market reacts negatively, that of course affects business as well as, ultimately speaking, people's pocketbooks.
Yeah. And the administration says, they say that they knew there would be a negative reaction short term, but they claim that the long-term benefits will outweigh them. We will see.
We will see.
Yeah.
Defense and military alliances. Um, Overall, the entire system of America's military alliances is being examined by this administration, particularly a NATO, of which I have a separate slide on, but we won't have time for all those details. But nevertheless, NATO is being questioned, including the critical key element of the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance, and that is Article 5, which is the common defense commitment, an attack on one being an attack on all. And that questioning of this alliance and its importance and the U.S. contributions to the alliance, as well as European contributions to the alliance, is one that creates a certain amount of anxiety, particularly on the European side of the Atlantic, in terms of can it depend on the United States as being a full-fledged partner in this? On the US side, you have the concern that for decades, and this is not a new Trump administration concern, for decades, the United States has been arguing that Europe has to make stronger contributions to the common defense. And for decades, America has invested infinitely more than Europe has in the common defense. And I think the concern by the US to go ahead and seek a greater European contribution is a fully legitimate one. The question, once again, is how does one best achieve that? Does one best achieve that by threatening to withdraw US participation and/or US commitment to the core principles of the alliance? Or does one do that in a way to go ahead and do this in a more collaborative atmosphere? Now, the Trump administration's response to that is that's been tried and it has not been very successful. So therefore, we need to go ahead and make a shot across the bow to get things moving. And there has been some reaction throughout Europe to go ahead and do just that. So the answer from this administration is, well, I guess we've been successful so far.
Mhm. Mhm.
And one has to acknowledge that there has certainly been a movement for a greater European commitment to spending the necessary percentage of GDP for the common defense in the NATO.
Ambassador, which countries would you say show that? I guess UK, Romania, Poland. Would you add Germany and France to that list?
Who have done so well? Well, Germany and France only recently have announced that they're going to be doing more. The ones who've been particularly excellent is Poland, yes. The Baltic states, the tiny Baltic states have consistently performed at a high level. Some of the Nordics as well. Even the newcomers, Finland and Sweden, are boosting their defense establishment expenditures. So it has been the larger traditional Western European allies, Germany in particular, Italy, Spain, who have not lived up to the commitment that was made years ago at the Wales summit of the North Atlantic Alliance to go ahead and at least come up to the 2% level, which has now been already exceeded. The US has demanded we should be going as high as 5%.
Right.
So the point being is that Mr. Putin has done us all in one way a favor, and that is by threatening the European security, he has hardened some of the commitment of our European allies to go ahead and step up to the plate when it comes to
Oh.
their own defense.
So it seems that the closer you are geographically to the Russian Federation, the greater your contribution. That seems to be the pattern.
And that certainly seems to also be the demand of the Trump administration that that's where the Europeans should be making a disproportionately higher contribution versus the United States.
Mhm.
And one can assess that argument on its own merits.
Mhm.
Uh, and America's first foreign policy. Please note the S in the title of this particular slide. Uh, the first trip that the new Secretary of State, Mr. Rubio, has undertaken as Secretary of State was to south of our borders. And that sent an important signal that the United States planned to pay closer attention to its own hemisphere, which I think is a valiant direction that if one looks at the attention the US has traditionally paid to its own hemisphere, it has been at best episodic. And in that context, it sends an important signal for him to have gone to uh, various countries in Central and South America to go ahead and demonstrate that the United States cares about its neighbors to the south. Now, alongside that, of course, have also been some somewhat controversial positions, most particularly the one in bullet number 2, and that is the Panama Canal issue.
Yeah.
Uh, Again, to be fair to the administration's position on the Panama Canal, the security and safety and guaranteed international access to the Panama Canal is a national security priority for the United States, and I think that is completely legitimate. The United States has a deep interest, as does the rest of the international community, for the canal to be internationally accessible without any interference by any one country or another. The concern about the control of port areas on both sides of the canal, both the Pacific and the Atlantic side of the canal, by a Hong Kong corporation that can no longer be considered to be independent of mainland China, is something that I think is a legitimate concern and question for the United States. And I think that is something that it should legitimately work out with the Panamanian authorities to seek to make sure that that international accessibility is maintained without any potential threat to either civilian or, for that matter, a strategic transit through the canal. The point that becomes controversial and for me unacceptable is the suggestion that the United States will simply seize control of the canal if it is not satisfied in these efforts.
And we should remember that when President Carter negotiated the transfer of the authority to the country of Panama, this was I believe it was a 99-year agreement, and all he was doing was abiding by the agreement. In the in the fire hose of information, Ambassador, I think I saw a piece that indicated that the Hong Kong possession of the entry and exit points had been sold or was going to be sold under pressure from the Trump administration? And if so, China would no longer have control. I don't know where that stands, and I don't know if you
It
saw the
stands
same
it
news.
stands in the offer that an American company has made a multi-billion-dollar offer to go ahead and buy the port facilities on both ends of the canal, and it is now in negotiation. So it's in process, but it has not yet been consummated.
So potentially this could satisfy the legitimate point that the administration makes of the existential need to have the canal open to international navigation. Maybe, right?
I think you just put it right. It could maybe. It could maybe.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you.
that leads us directly into China very well, because of course China is the big issue in terms of adversarial relationships. Um, uh, it has been these 6 bullets come directly out of the testimony for the confirmation of Secretary Rubio, in which his key point was he considers China to be the most potent and dangerous adversary the U.S. has ever faced. This is directly quoted from his statement. So this is how the United States views China, not in a I would in defense of the administration say not in a belligerent way of seeking confrontation with China. It does not. Not in an exclusionary way to go ahead and close off all trade deals with China. It does not. But in critical areas, it does seek to what it calls eliminate dependence on China in critical industries. And at the same time, and of course, it has imposed tariffs on Chinese goods. But at the same time, President Trump has claimed that he has a good relationship with President Xi Jinping, and has reached out to go ahead and maintain a relationship that runs alongside some of these very, very strong and direct measures that have been taken vis-a-vis China. So this is a very complex relationship, and one that is not completely and utterly divorced from previous administrations' relations with China, which have been both recognition of the adversarial nature of the relationship, but at the same time also not seeking confrontation and seeking common purpose whenever that is possible. It is not that vastly different from previous administrations, be they Republican or Democrat.
In that regard, can you comment on the notion of decoupling under the Biden administration? Implicitly, both sides were trying to reduce their dependence, the one on the other, and the term was decoupling. Did that ever happen? And is it still a legitimate objective of the U.S. government?
I think it is still an objective of the U.S. government. I would say has it happened? The answer is no. Is it in process of being worked to happen? The answer is yes. Such as, for instance, the creation of massive chip manufacturing in the United States, being major facilities. In fact, in Arizona, several major facilities from a Taiwanese company to be transferred for manufacturing in the United States for some of the critical electronic components of modern technology is happening. Pharma being and pharmaceuticals and protective gear for the next pandemic, if you wish, to be manufactured in U.S. or U.S. friendly environments, so that one does not have to depend on China for the supply of critical goods in that kind of a situation. All these elements are in process, and some of the tariff policies of this administration, which were also supported by the previous administration, are designed to go ahead and shield the critical needs of the United States and its allies from Chinese control of some of these areas that are considered to be of particular national security importance.
And that's the U.S. side. It was said 3 or 4 years ago that China had an equal interest in wanting to decouple. I suppose that means relying less on the U.S. market. God knows China has a great, vast array of choices in finding markets, and they have done so. Are they similarly motivated to want to decouple? And does it have to do with markets from the Chinese side?
I think that they are, to a certain degree, I think similarly motivated. I would say that they are less concerned about dependent, yes, on the part of depending on the U.S. consumer to go ahead and feed the growth of the Chinese economy. That they would like to diversify beyond the United States categorically. Belt and Road and the overall initiative of investment in development and control of infrastructure around the world is all designed to go ahead and give China options that go beyond the American market, as important and as big as the American market is. So in that context, yes, they are they are going in a similar direction on their own behalf, but less in terms of retrenching into China, but more into broadening their overall economic and trade relationships around the world beyond the United States as being the central focus. So
Okay, so
both countries are working in directions to go ahead and secure themselves from whatever political influence there would be on the relationship with the other.
and we should underscore what you said earlier, Ambassador, about previous administrations having the same concept and the same objective, that this is maybe an accentuated form of it, but it's really not new.
That's correct. And I think it's an important point you're making, and that is that during all this turbulence and all this uniqueness of some of the policies of this current administration, there is a certain continuity on certain elements of US foreign policy, which is not particularly a departure from past administrations. So again, one needs to be level-headed when one looks at the current policy construct and not just simply say, yes, it's all completely, totally new and totally outside the realm of previously established norms, because that would not be accurate. Now, whenever one talks about China, one has to, of course, also talk about Taiwan. And when one talks about Taiwan, you actually have to talk about Taiwan, Ukraine, and other parts where uh, potential sovereignty, or at least a territorial integrity, if not sovereignty, is being threatened by one nation potentially over another. So, but since we are on China, we slide directly into Taiwan. And this is simply a reiteration. This is not a Trump thing here on the slide. This is US policy and has been US policy since the 1980s. Um, this is US policy toward the territorial integrity of Taiwan and US opposition to any forcible reunification of the Chinese mainland with Taiwan in the process. It is something that is always out there as a potential conflict point, one that would, of course, draw the United States and the world community, for that matter, into this conflict. And then when one expands this, I would argue, when one expands this to what's going on in the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, one has to look at what signal does a Russian success in seizing territory in Ukraine affect the psychology and the policy of China vis-a-vis its interest regarding Taiwan. Those things, in my opinion, are linked. Whether one sees them linked, obviously not geographically, but certainly geopolitically and psychologically, they're very much related to each other.
And I would say, wow, 1982 goes way back in time. Ambassador, why did we accept the one China policy? Were we bamboozled? Were we intimidated? Was this kind of a defeat for US policy to accept a one China policy?
That's an excellent question. I would not see it as a defeat for US policy. Here's my characterization, but please have your participants and have you tell me whether you agree or disagree with that. The reaching out of establishing a firm and a constructive relationship between the United States and China, the Nixon going to China, the starting of ping pong diplomacy, the entire outreach to China was simply a realization it is a huge country that cannot be ignored. And therefore, it is in the interest of the United States to create a constructive relationship, not one that agrees on everything, because we don't, but one that is constructive and finds a way forward peaceably to regulate the interaction between our two very large and important countries. So in that context, Taiwan could not simply be set aside and not addressed. So the one China policy was intended to go ahead and recognize the fact that the relationship between US and China is critically important, that Taiwan is a part of that overall complex relationship, but at the same time to lay down certain markers about what George Shultz would have called the moral principles of American foreign policy, and that is that we will not support the forcible incorporation or the forcible takeover of territory in the 20th and 21st centuries going forward, whether that be in the Pacific or whether that be in Europe or anywhere else in the world.
And the South China Sea makes me very nervous, and I think we have reason to be watching closely what may happen. It's been said many times that if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, then PRC has a rationale for taking Taiwan. I don't think we would see amphibious landings, but we would see a more subtle type of encroachment. A shameless plug here. Our last session in the series, April 7th, we will have Dr. Tai Sun, who's a citizen of the People's Republic of China, who teaches in Virginia at Christopher Newport University, and who talks about this notion of strategic ambiguity. He's wonderfully informed on that. I just want to share with the group that will be our last session in the spring. Tai Sun is a great analyst, and he's also done sociological studies of the society in China and where do its loyalties lie. Very fascinating work. So, Ambassador, China, yes, and Taiwan. The previous administration also identified that, I think, in the national security strategy as a more important challenge than the Russian Federation, even during the war. I think.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. I'm going to go through the next few because I want to talk a little bit more about Ukraine and Russia in our last 15 minutes together. And that is,
Yeah.
India is a critically important country, of course. It is one that where the relationship, the first visit by Prime Minister Modi together with President Trump was a very positive one, even though there are some clear issues between India's economy, American economy, as well as between the second bullet here on the slide, the Make in India policy on the which is sort of the India First policy by Minister Modi, and the America First policy here in this country, as well as migration and overstay of visas, etc. Overall, a much more differentiated and more positive relationship between India and the United States, and one that both countries are deeply interested in continuing to grow in a positive direction. Again, not a Trump invention, but rather one that has been characterized America's foreign policy for a number of years in terms of seeking a strong and positive relationship between these two large economies and large countries and important influences in world events.
Mm-hmm.
The Asia Pacific writ large, this continuation from the first Trump administration to find what they call a broader policy toward North Korea, to find some way forward to dealing with North Korea. It was not successful in the first Trump administration. It has shown no success in the Biden administration, but one nevertheless that's still part of the agenda of this administration to seek some kind of a way to deal with the North Korea issue, but also to strengthen relationships in the Asia Pacific region in order for American influence overall to be more firmly and more broadly established as America seeks to pull back from its European commitments. This is where the efforts of this administration are intending to put America's assets for greater influence. Again, not a current administration initiative alone. This dates all the way back to previous administrations, both Democratic and Republican, to make the Asia Pacific the focus of a lot of U.S. foreign policy and national security attention.
Mhm.
After we've talked about NATO,
Yep.
uh,
Yeah.
we've
Okay.
talked about NATO, made that very clear when we talked about alliances. This is a big deal This is a big deal, and the final chapter on where the U.S. ultimately stands on the future of NATO has not yet been reached, and it is an active point of discussion. The one thing I will say here is re-emphasize what I said earlier about the increased European commitment. Europe is for the first time, and you see it in this very large commitment that the incoming Chancellor of Germany has articulated that Germany plans to do vis-a-vis its defense capabilities, which is being mirrored by many other commitments throughout the European Union. That Europe, if it sees itself, and it has articulated that to some degree, of no longer being able to depend on the American overall umbrella, be it conventional or nuclear, that it will have to develop capacities on its own to take care of itself without the US being part of that effort. That is a sea change in the relationship between the US and Europe, dating all the way back from the end of World War II until this very moment. And I think the immensity of this has not yet been fully joined in the context of the ongoing discussions between our two sides.
Yeah. Would you say that if NATO has a future with a reduced or removed American presence, it would be Macron, Merz, and Starmer who would be the leaders of the new configuration? Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say, especially since the UK and France are the two nuclear powers in Europe. Germany has articulated that it wants to be brought under the French-UK nuclear umbrella if the United States is no longer going to be providing that assurance. And those are, after all, the three largest. I would add, at least on the conventional side, I would add Poland to the overall mix because Poland is very resolute, very committed, and fully cognizant of the threat coming from Putin's Russia in order for Poland to play a major role in a future European-centric European security structure that does not involve the United States.
Yeah, thanks.
Then that brings us, of course, to the two big issues, Russia and Ukraine. In one way, well, again, it's a bifurcated relationship with Russia. In one way, you've got this very warm and very supportive relationship between President Trump and President Putin. These reiterations at various levels of the Trump administration about wanting to find a way forward, a positive way forward in the relationship with Russia. In one way, one could argue is, well, what's wrong with that? Isn't that a good thing not to have a confrontation with a major nuclear power? Yes, but then comes a huge but. But under what terms? Under what premise? Under what set of values and principles should that relationship go forward? Should it simply accede to Russian demands vis-a-vis the rebuilding of a certain amount of influence in Europe after the collapse of the Soviet Union? Or should it be based on the basic values that have accentuated the free West, if you wish, since the Cold War days all the way to the very present, and to find a way forward on that basis rather than simply acceding to a number of Russian demands, which brings us to the key Russian demand of the moment, and that is their demand vis-a-vis Ukraine. That second bullet there is it is this administration's positions and concessions will have to be made by both sides for this war of attrition to stop. A valiant goal for the dying to stop. It's hard to argue against that. Why would anyone want to advocate innocents being hurt? Anybody being hurt? Yes. But at what cost? And when concessions by both sides are being mentioned, there is this growing impression that somehow the Russian position is given greater weight than the Ukrainian position. And based back on the George Shultz principles of a moral foreign policy, there's only one invader and one defender. And Russia is the invader and Ukraine is a defender. And that reality seems to be blurred in the ongoing discussions about ceasefires and ultimate solutions to the overall conflict in which both sides are being given equal standing, which I do not agree with. I think one is the aggressor and one is the victim. And so both sides should not have equal weight in this overall debate, even though both parties obviously need to be part of an eventual settlement if it can be reached.
Mhm. Big question, big question. And Ambassador, two very interesting chats have come in, but I don't want to interrupt your
No, please, let's
narrative.
go ahead and deal with the chats.
Yes.
Let's talk.
Okay. Well, the first one from Baxter Katz asks about the rise of the right in Europe, AfD in Germany, Le Pen in France. Does this imply that the people of Europe may be less committed to NATO than they were previously? That's one chat. And then Peterson Waweru, writing from Nairobi, points out, I didn't know this. If is this true? The UK does not even manufacture its own missiles. Its Tridents rely on US for servicing, and the UK is leasing these missiles. Is it logical for Germany to count on the UK for protection? This is something I didn't know at all. I thought the UK was producing its own weapons.
Yes.
Uh,
I'll be glad to answer both of those questions. So
Thank you.
the first one about less European commitment to NATO. Uh, I am certain from all of my exposure to our European friends over decades of my diplomatic service, is that while there have often been very, very frank discussions amongst the allies on various elements of NATO policies, dating all the way back to, again, the Soviet Union days and the Cold War and medium-range nuclear weapon introduction into the European continent, and various other kinds of debates we've had so far. As I can assure you that in large majorities in Europe, despite the fact that there are some critical voices, in large majorities in Europe, Europeans would prefer to have NATO preserved and America in it fully. That it is not a growing European position to get America out of NATO. It is more the fear of America leaving NATO or America pulling back from the NATO commitment that concerns most Europeans, not the other way around. That's my impression. That's what I hear from my European friends. That's what I've heard from the Europeans all along. Even when they were critical of American policy, it was never intended to get America out of the alliance.
Mhm.
So that's not a common. It is the position of some political elements in Europe, but that is not a majority European opinion in my experience.
Thank you
As
for
far as
that.
the UK, that position by Waweru Peterson is correct. The UK maintains its missile capability from U.S. missiles. They become UK missiles. They become UK's nuclear capability. But yes, the United States is the source of their of particularly of their submarine nuclear missile capability. Uh, it is not illogical for them to depend, for Germany to depend on the UK and the French nuclear capability, because I cannot envision in any kind of a scenario under this administration or any future administration of the United States that America would withdraw its support for the UK nuclear missile capability. So therefore, it is irrelevant whether they get it from us or not. The United States, I just cannot see a scenario in which the United States would say, well, the UK has to go ahead and develop its own. We no longer want to go ahead and supply whatever we supply them for. They're maintaining their nuclear capability.
As we run out of time, and I do want to try to put your wonderful comments in context in a moment. One of our participants graduated from ASU. Professor or Ambassador, how does this work? Does ASU uh, entertain or admit students remotely? Are there possibilities for undergraduate and graduate studies from abroad directly with ASU?
It does. It does. In fact, my leadership diplomacy and national security lab, we operate a master's program, an online international affairs and Leadership Masters program, which has students from all around the world in it. And by all means, you are able to take ASU online undergraduate as well as graduate degrees, which ASU has a sophisticated system for delivery of that content. In addition to that, ASU also has partnerships with universities, including American University Kyiv, by the way, which I don't know whether Taras has been part of that effort, but American University Kyiv is actually operated by ASU and by curriculum that is provided by Arizona State University.
I am guessing that there's a lot of salivating going on in this group. This is marvelous. I mean, I know that ASU is everywhere in the world. It's a gigantic thing, and it's a very forward-looking institution. Taras may be able to inform about this. Well, I would ask you, Ambassador, to provide links which I can forward to the group. I'm guessing that several in this group would be very interested in looking at graduate programs that don't require travel. I think this is a huge advantage. Taras, any comment on your experience? And then we do need to wrap up.
Yes.
Yeah, well, actually, I confirm that my educational effort was ASU was through American University Kiev, and I did 1 year at the Thunderbird School of Global Management
There you go.
of the Arizona State University, which offers masters in leadership and management, but with a lot of the global affairs angle, particularly at the American University Kiev. But I actually have a question, a quick one, if I may ask. At the end.
Please do. Please do. Go right ahead.
Yeah, actually, one of the Russian opposition politicians, Grigory Yavlinsky, who I'm sure you are aware of and know, and maybe know personally, once said that back in 1991, he was told by Nicholas Brady, who was the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury at the George W. Bush Senior administration. He was told by Secretary Brady that in the American foreign policy, Americans do what is understandable and beneficial to them, and nothing else. And would you agree with that statement that that is sort of the core of the American foreign policy? Or how would you comment on that, Mr. Polk?
Yes, no, I'll be glad to comment on that. No, look, it goes back to something I said earlier in our hour, and that is, first of all, every nation advances a foreign policy that is beneficial and understandable to its people. America is not unique in that regard. I would argue that every single country in the world pursues a foreign policy that's understandable and beneficial to itself. That is not the question is how does one apply this principle of understandable and beneficial as an exclusionary principle or an integrated principle? Exclusionary means it's understandable only by us and beneficial only to us. That to me, I think, is destructive and counterproductive. But understandable in a sense of you have to have a foreign policy that's being carried by the major stakeholders of a democracy is of course something you need to do. You can't simply have the foreign policy of in any democracy. If it's an autocracy, it makes no difference because nobody cares what the people think. Putin's Russians people, Putin doesn't care what the people think. Xi Jinping doesn't care what the people think. He doesn't have to worry about that. In our democracies, we have to make sure that the stakeholders, the sovereign in our democracy, who are the people, carry that foreign policy as something that they, number one, understand, number two, they support. If not, it can't work. And as far as beneficial, well, sure, I want to make sure that I'm. Look, I'll answer your question with that one phrase, and then I'll promise I'll get off because Dan's going to say it's enough already.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
For me, America first. The way I define patriotism as an American, I say patriotism is America first in my heart because I'm an American. Nationalism is America first in your face as a non-American,
Ah,
where I push my position on you to go ahead and make you feel less than what you are. And I think that is the dividing line between those concepts. It is perfectly good for me to feel good about my country, but I do not have to feel badly about your country simply because I feel good about mine. That's the point.
Thank you so
Uh,
much.
would you consider running for president? I would support you completely. This is absolutely marvelous. You may have some concluding comments. I would like to say that you have not only inspired us today, but even beyond inspiration, you have given us context. You have in a world now that many see as chaotic and unexplainable and aggressive and foolish. There's a lot of despair in the United States and in other countries, but you have shown us that at least many of the things we're seeing are not newly created. They can be linked to previous administrations and to rational thought. Not all, but many of the policies, and you've given us a lot of detail on uh, Panama and China and Russian Federation. This is not. It does appear to be crazy at times, but it is not outside of the context of a historical pattern. Would you see it that way, Ambassador?
I could thoroughly agree with you, and I'll give you this closing comment about dealing with each other in a national sense as well as in a world community sense, and that is that it is really important for us to stop doing one thing that we see occurring right now, both inside the United States and across national boundaries in other parts of the world, and that is to see someone who disagrees with us as an enemy. We need to stop doing that because we need to come back to a sense of community in which we can very forcefully disagree with each other without identifying each other as enemies from one position to another, unless we have actually taken an aggressive act, in which point we should resist. We should resist and defend ourselves. But in the context of finding solutions to the key issues that go back to my initial slide about where does conflict, where does human suffering in the world come from? It comes from malignant, absent, or incompetent leadership. We need to regain this sense of the importance of leadership through character and taking it on as a personal responsibility, not just as a national responsibility, but as a personal responsibility of each of us to go ahead and deal with each other with a certain amount of dignity and respect, rather than simply casting aspersions from one to the other. It sounds a little bit messianic, it sounds a little bit sort of preachy, but it is really, really important because we're not going to resolve the problems of the world by simply sending more drones in and bombing each other. That's not going to be the answer.
Well, again, this is inspirational, Ambassador, and we turn to you today and in the future for your wisdom. When many people have said we should stop treating one another as enemies, and yet we usually put that in the context of the other should be less aggressive. It starts with each individual, and while individual actions may seem insignificant, in fact, they're very significant. And thank you, thank you, thank you. The in the chat, people have seen that's an L, correct? LDNS at ASU.
LDNS at asu.edu.
Yeah.
So it's Leadership Diplomacy and National Security Lab. If you just put that into your browser, it'll come right up, and our programs come up there, both our undergraduate as well as our graduate program, as well as our leadership development opportunities that we also offer through the lab.
Absolutely marvelous. Baxter Casts thanks you, and I thank you, and we all thank you. Wonderful. And then next week I'll be posting notices in Google Classroom. I will try to reiterate the link to Zoom. I think some people may have lost track of that. The two coming up are Angela Stent. I'm sure Ambassador Polk knows of Angela Stent, now at Brookings, a very accomplished expert on the what we call Eurasia. I avoid that term because it's offensive to some.
Yes.
And Tai Sun, possibly one other. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful,
Thanks.
wonderful
Great to
presentation.
be with you. Enjoy
Okay.
the rest of your day. All the best.
Thank you so much. Same to you. Bye.